Welcome to the Grow Strong Leaders podcast. I'm your host, Meredith Bell, and I interview business leaders who are committed to their own growth and the development of everyone on their team. If you enjoy my podcast, be sure to subscribe and rate it on your favorite podcast platform. Welcome back to another episode of the Grow Strong Leaders podcast. I'm your host, Meredith Bell, and you know I love to bring on my show leaders who have focused on their own growth and development over the years and are also dedicated to helping others achieve their potential. And today I have someone as my guest who has been working in both of those areas for many years, and I want to welcome him now. Hi, Brian Wallace. Welcome to my show.
Hi, Meredith. Great to be here. I tell you, I've been looking so forward to this conversation since the first time we met. So excited to jump into all kinds of fun stuff today.
Yes, I am too. And of course, I want to acknowledge and thank our mutual colleague and friend, Akim Novak, who is the one who introduced us. He's a great connector, and he just sensed, I think, in advance, the great chemistry you and I were going to have. So this is going to be such a wonderful conversation. Let me introduce you in a little bit more formal way before we jump into our conversation. Brian is the Chief Learning Officer at Wintrust Financial Corporation, and he's been a senior executive in the financial services industry for more than 18 years. In his roles, Brian has been responsible for executive coaching, leadership development, sales training, and sales enablement. At HSBC, Brian was awarded the coveted President Award, given annually to only one individual per business that demonstrated the true character of the company and its core values. And, you know, Brian, I think I sensed that from you when we very first spoke. And I would love to have you tell us a little bit briefly about your journey as a leader yourself through your career.
Yeah, it's been a really fun journey. And as I look back now, as I'm kind of approaching what I think may be the culmination of a career, um, to see how it all kind of played out in all that. So I started kind of really in a strange place, and that was in real estate appraisal. And I was a number cruncher. And I would go out and I'd appraise multiple properties, and I'd do several hundred of these things a year. And I had that epiphany moment sitting at my desk one time. I'd risen up through, at that point I was with Bank One, I'd risen up and through the appraisal ranks, and there was really no other place to go. So I was having that moment is like, is this all there is? And so I picked up the job posting that day and looked out there on the job posting, and there was this posting for a sales trainer. I'm like, well, sales trainers seem like they have a lot of fun. Maybe I'll call the hiring manager and see what it's all about. So, dear friend of mine, Andy Hubbard, I called up Andy and I said, Andy, I'm really excited about this opportunity. What can you tell me about it? And Andy said, well, I have good news. I have bad news. I'm like, okay, well, so what's the bad news? He said, well, we hired the person for the job. I'm like, oh, okay. I said, well, then what's the good news? And he said, they didn't show up for work on Monday. So you could say it was an accident. You could say it was fate. I don't know what it was. But a few weeks later, I found myself as a sales trainer at Bank One, not knowing a thing about training or developing people. And literally over the years, I've done every role when it comes to people development, from a sales trainer hitting the pavement in the airlines over and over again to leading training functions, being an executive coach, and just investing in people overall. But and then as that went along, more and more opportunities started to pop up. So from various organizations, I always apologize to my family. Even when the kids were little, we were jet setting through 4 corporate moves and taking them all over the country as my career continued to advance through the years. So it was an extremely fun journey as I look back on it, and the things that I got to experience, the people that I had a chance to impact and spend time with and develop, And some of my fondest memories are those that have gone on to similar roles that are leading training or leadership functions now in their day-to-day jobs. So it's fun to keep up with them on LinkedIn and see what they're up to. And
Mhm.
know there might have been just a little bit of help along the way that I was able to give them as they build out their career overall. So, and that's,
That's
I often kind of think I have this thing when I coach people, I talk about it a lot with them. I call it legacy mode. So you kind of get into this mode of you're more retrospective on what you've done and what you can, excuse me, leave behind to influence and impact people along the way. So I've coached a lot of people as they've gone through legacy mode, and ironically, I kind of feel like I'm there. So and that's a lot of why this is exciting to do this type of event and share on here and giving back to a community and an industry that's been so good to me.
that's great. I'm curious, when you think back over the years, was there an individual or anything in particular that influenced you with your own leadership development?
There were a lot. As I was thinking about this conversation, I was trying to pinpoint like some really specific ones that are out there, and some of them are very small, but I remember them to the day. That was there, and ironically, and we may get into this a little bit later on, but a lot of the impact that was made on me was individuals that didn't display great leadership and left that impact on me to say, I don't want to be that way overall. So, and that itself is something we can unpack in our conversation. But I can remember vividly a lesson that I learned, and I've passed this on dozens of times to folks on my team and those that I've had a chance to coach. And I can remember being very spirited one time when the company put out an email that I didn't like the topic in the email. So I decided I'd fire back what I thought about that email. And Andy, who I spoke about before, Andy was kind enough to put his arm around me, walked into my cube, put his arm around me, said, "Let's go for a walk." And I can still see the walk. I can still see the little pub table that we sat down in the hallway. And he said, "You know what? Maybe it would have been better to handle that a little bit differently. There's this rule called the 24-hour rule, right?" And he walked me through that moment that has stuck with me forever that said, stop, pause, think in terms of responding and not reacting, and
Mm.
take that moment to really do that. And, you know, you can call that a life lesson or a leadership lesson, but that sticks with me all the time. And I constantly share that moment. And if you ask my team, you would hear them saying, respond or react, right? They hear me saying that all the time when we're going through different things. So that's just one that comes to mind. Uh,
Yeah. And
thanks.
before we go on, Brian, just hearing you say that, it is such an important element for a leader to recognize about themselves when there may be this temptation to respond quickly, and of course, not realizing they're really reacting to what
Mhm.
the person said instead of really pausing and thinking about what's the potential impact if I do
Yeah.
or say what I have the impulse to say in this moment. So I,
Yeah.
I think that's a good life lesson too. But for leaders, I think it's really important.
Yeah. And it's unfortunately, you still see it at all ranks in an organization where you need to just pause for a minute and step into that moment and think about the impact of words that may come out in that moment. But we all are guilty of it. Like, I'm not perfect at it. So there's those moments where emotion takes over and you react and you know it the instant you do it. You want to
Mm,
pull them all back, all right, as quickly as
yeah.
you can, but it's not easy to do. So that one was learned a little bit in the School of Hard Knocks, but I'm purposeful now about slowing down and responding versus reacting
Mhm.
to different things. So
And I think that's such a an important insight to pass along to the people on your team and really anyone that you're interacting with, rather than directly going after what did the leaders do wrong. Let's look at your experience as an executive coach. You
Mm.
worked with at least 200 leaders in an executive coaching role when you worked at a regional bank. And this will get at those negative behaviors by simply asking, what are some of the, starting with, what are some of the challenges that you found were sort of common threads that these leaders were experiencing in their work that they needed help with from you?
Well, the list is long, and this may be part two of our podcast on some of these things. But I think fundamentally, what I found was a real absence of coaching or a place to go for leaders in particular. So, coaching is used in terms in organizations freely. But do we really understand what it is? Is there truly a coaching strategy? And what does it mean to coach someone? We say, if you look at a job description, coaching your team will be part of the job description. But that's all it says. It's like saying, if you say this, we need to work on executive presence, right? You've probably heard this. I want you to coach this person on executive presence. Great. What part of executive presence, right? It's such a broad topic that's there. Coaching is the same way. So my purpose in developing a coaching strategy was all around putting some structure around what it meant to coach. So giving them easy play-by-play ways to do it. I always talk about the bookends. So the bookends when it comes to coaching is how you start the coaching conversation, how you end the coaching conversation. And it's amazing if they get the bookends right, the middle kind of fills itself in through the conversation overall. But what you found typically in most of the observations I did and the feedback that I would give people is this meeting isn't about you, Mr. or Mrs. Leader, right? When we sit down in a one-on-one with someone on our team, we just take off, right? We take off and we say, okay, where is this? When will that be done? This is the pipeline, right? We dig into all the stuff that we want. And what's that other person on the other side feeling? You know, that time, I don't care who you are in an organization, you covet time with your leader. You want their attention. You want to spend some time to be able to connect with them, for them to understand what's going on in your world and for them to care about what's going on in your world. And that was just a missing element that I found in a lot of kind of fundamental thoughts when it came to coaching and leading people. It was that concept of that time is for me. It's all about
Mm.
pipeline. It's all about what you're doing to hit your number in a lot of ways. So we fundamentally shifted that, and I spent years and years, 6.5 years, kind of helping leaders understand that this time is about them. It's about developing your people. It's about what's important to them, which is ironically the opening line in the bookend. So the coaching strategy that I always taught them came from a book called The Coaching Habit. And the first question when you start a coaching conversation is, what's on your mind? And then you zip it. That's the other thing that's really hard for leaders is they can't zip it at that particular point. So, you know, if you observe great leaders out there, the ones that we read their books, we do the things that they tell us to do, we adopt their philosophies. But if you actually watch them, they ask very short and simple questions. They don't ask a question that's a paragraph long, that you don't understand what the word is at the end of it that they're actually looking for overall. So a simple way to open up a coaching conversation is, what's on your mind?
Mm-hmm.
The beauty of that question is the recipient of that question can't escape it. They can't. There's no escape to that. There's no yes, no answer. There's no way
Right.
to shut that down. You have to respond in some
Mm-hmm.
way, which is the biggest clue that you have as a leader is in that response. It tells you how the rest of this interaction is going to go. Um, and yeah, so people that really honed that craft and started to adopt that philosophy of understanding what it was to make this interaction about the person became the most successful coaches. And it was fun to watch it happen because it was a very simple thing. I tell them, this is not rocket science. This is a simple question that can fundamentally change how you coach your people.
Yeah, thinking about folks who are used to managing things and, focusing on the tasks or the outcomes to think about switching that. It doesn't come naturally at first
Oh, no.
and requires practice. So I'm guessing your coaching entailed being a support and a sounding board for them as they would try things and have it either go well or not as well as they had hoped, and then
Yeah.
learning from that to make improvements going forward.
Yeah. I had something. So I am a firm believer in what I call the big three. Like, because I think if it's a lot about me personally. I can remember three things. I can't remember seven, but I can remember three. So at the end of every coaching intervention I've ever had, you get your big three. These are the three things you're going to try, focus on, or do between now and the next time we have a conversation. And we're going to talk about how it went. So try something new in a safe environment and let's see how it goes. And let's hone your style because I would consistently tell people I'm not here to change who you are. You have your own personality. I'm here to use your gifts and abilities to the best we can to impact your people in a positive way. So you don't have to follow my script, but understand why we're asking you to do the things we're asking you to do.
Mm-hmm. That makes so much sense. So, thinking about shifts or changes they would make, one is becoming a more effective coach based on just the bookends you were talking about, the opening and the closing. So they had something tangible to
Mhm.
use. What were
Mhm.
some other shifts that you noticed them making to become more effective leaders as they went through coaching with you?
Well, the interesting thing, and every organization I've ever talked to, and anyone who's ever worked in any organization I've ever talked to, has followed this model. If you're really good at a job, we're going to make you a manager, right? If you're a really good salesperson, we're going to make you a sales manager. Corporate America, if there's one thing I could change before I hang up my hat and jump on my boat with my fishing pole, I would challenge organizations to say, when you're looking for a leader, look for leadership traits. Like taking your best salesperson off the street to make them a sales leader isn't always the best thing you can do for the organization or for them. Look for those traits that are there that make people great leaders. And a lot of organizations just get that wrong. It's a natural trend. You're great at this job, therefore, you're going to be great at telling other people how to do this job. But we didn't look at what's your ability to lead people and influence people, and how have we developed you in that space overall?
Well, building on your big three, let's talk about what are three attributes or traits that you would encourage a company to look at when they're looking at the possible internal candidates. What are three that you would say might rise to the top that would indicate this person has real leadership, not just leadership potential, but potential to succeed in that
Mm.
leadership role?
Yeah. Well, I'm going to take that question. I'm going to point it toward a book, because every person, and if anyone watches this podcast or listens to this podcast that I have had the chance to spend time with will know this book because they've been required to read this book. It is my absolute favorite book in the entire world. I constantly putting it in front, and it has a little bit of a fun story to it. So if you indulge me for a couple of minutes, I will share this story, as I tell many people. So one of my favorite authors is Patrick Lencioni. I had a chance to meet him at a conference many, many years ago. I think he was doing his talk on the five dysfunctions of a team in that event. So, and ever since then, I've subscribed to the Table Group. I've read every book he's put out overall, and I landed in a book, and it impacted me in so many ways that it became the book that I have given everybody to read, whether it's someone in coaching or someone in a leadership role or taking on a leadership role. And the book was released with a very interesting title. So I'm going to hold it up here on the camera and you can probably see it.
Mm-hmm.
Three Signs of a Miserable Job, right? So imagine if you would, Meredith, you have a corporate job and you go in and in your office and someone told you to read this book and this book is sitting on your desk and your manager comes in and sees this book sitting on your desk. Right? What are people going to think, right? The three signs do you hate your job? That is not what this book is all about. The interesting thing about this book is you can't find it under this title anymore. They've changed the title. The book
Mm.
is now called The Art of Employee Engagement. Now, why they changed it, who really knows? I suspect they changed it because it's a great book, but everyone was scared to put it on their desk because of the original title in the book that's out there. That's an unconfirmed story, but a hypothesis on my end. Needless to say, the three signs of the miserable job is all about being a manager and understanding the three things that drive job misery. We all know that, what 87%, give or take a few percent based on statistics, people leave their job because of their direct manager. So a direct manager has definite impact on job satisfaction, that type of stuff. So what the book tells you in Fable story, which I love when it comes to coaching people because it pulls them into the book when they're reading the book. It tells you have to really do three things. And the first one is anonymity. And I can never say that word correctly, so I'll stumble all over it, right? It's just like one of those words you cannot say. Anyways, the concept of do you really know your people, right?
Mm.
So if you're looking for a great leader, does that leader show true empathy and compassion and the ability to get to know people? Do they ask good questions? Do they know spouses' names? Do they understand what sport their child is playing? What they like to do, whatever the case may be. Do you show true interest in your people? Is really important. The second one is called irrelevance. So the one of the signs of that people say lead a job of misery is not really understanding how their work contributes to the organization as a whole. So do you have ability to connect the dots with this job, maybe six layers deep to the overall strategy of the organization? That's a real talent to paint that picture, to show people what it means for them to come to work every day to do this job and how it impacts the overall bottom line of the organization. So, are you able to connect those dots in a meaningful way and one that's, heartfelt as well? And then the third thing that leaves a job misery is called immeasurement. So, people don't really know, nor are leaders very good at assessing their progress toward an end goal. And
Mm.
a lot of that comes back to coaching, right? And understanding, am I moving in the right direction? Are we giving good feedback? Uh,
Mm-hmm.
do I understand how I'm doing? Am I moving in the right direction? Other than a conversation we have at the end of the year, sometimes people don't know. But for them, you're always wondering. I would talk to leaders over and over again that says, "Hey, this leader would say, I haven't seen my boss in a month. I'm wondering if I did something wrong." Right? So it's like just because that lack of contact, they start to think that something isn't going right
Mm-hmm.
overall. So that whole measurement thing is really important to people and understanding that. So when I think about three things, I always I always go there because ever since I've read that book, that has been top of mind for me, and that's the most important thing as a leader. You do those three things correctly, you avoid job misery. You create careers for people. You create engagement on your team, and you create that stickiness that you want for a long-term employee to be with you on your team.
Hmm. So when you think about a company that is, let's say, holding those three things in their head and
Mhm.
looking at potential candidates for a leadership role, are these behaviors that you would see in someone who doesn't currently have that title, but would still demonstrate? And I'm thinking about just feedback in general. Is there someone who notices what people do and acknowledges them either one on one or in a meeting, recognizing the contributions that others make? It seems to me that would be a behavioral, an observable behavior that you could say, oh, that demonstrates this third, area of measurement. Because to me, feedback is a form of measuring when you can attach value to what someone has done
Yeah.
and contributed. And of course, then that can tie it into the whole organization. And also the first one of letting them know, I notice you as a person, you
Mhm.
know.
Yeah.
So that's just one example that came to my mind. Are there others that you would think of that you've seen over the years that when you've seen someone that doesn't have the title but demonstrates leadership?
Yeah,
Are there
I think
things
the
that
ability to create clarity is super important. That's what people long for that. Now, I mean, alone, people love feedback and understanding where they are, but we see now, if I think I'm involved with ATD and part of their leadership group that's there, and understanding the clarity on what expectations are for people that are
Mm,
out. What skills are required to do this job successfully, right? So much work is being done on skills and competencies, and we talk about all these things that are important. So being able to create clarity on like this is the role, this is the job, this is what success looks like. I think the worst thing we can put on a job description is other jobs as assigned. But how many times is it on there? Right?
yeah.
It's the catch-all for all of those things that could be that we might want that person to be able to do. So creating that clarity, I think, is super important for folks. And I think that's become even more post-pandemic because we've gone through that expectation that people start to return to the office. And so there's a different expectation now of when I return to the office, what type of engagement is there going to be, right? I can sit on a Teams meeting at home if I'm going to sit in the office and be on a Teams meeting all day. So, you know, what does that look like? How can you create some clarity around what expectations are now in the office?
Mm,
We do something that's really neat here at Wintrust called Wintrust Wednesdays. So Wintrust Wednesdays, we all are in the office. So my challenge to my leadership team is how do we make those impactful? How do we create an engaging day because we're all here? We can
mhm,
have a meeting on Monday, Tuesday, Thursday, Friday, but on Wednesdays we need to make connections.
mm,
Doors open, not closed doors, office meetings. It's open doors, interact with people. We're all here. And that's what we want to do by coming back post-pandemic in the office is we want to create that connection. We want to interact. We want those kind of loose meetings that we may have a revelation when that
mm,
happens.
mhm. That's great. That's a really good example. I want to kind of shift now to the development of leaders because I know one of the things that struck me, and I'm sure struck you when you were considering working there at Wintrust, is their belief system around the development of people. So, would you just share what that is and why that means a lot to you?
Meredith, the interesting and what was really attracting about coming to Wintrust is their deep belief in developing their people and their commitment to doing that. Lots and lots of organizations say we're all about our people, right? Our people are our number one asset, right? That type of stuff. So it becomes kind of a bumper sticker, right, for a lot of organizations. And, you know, unfortunately, throughout my career, it just became normal that, yeah, we say that, but do we really put, the investment where it needs to be? So it was such a breath of fresh air when I walked in. I used to call them pinch me moments in my first few months here of like, we really do that? We're going to do that for our people? That's amazing, right? So the commitment to developing people and creating careers here. What we often say, it's great if you find a job here, but we're really more interested in you finding a career here. And we might not necessarily put you in the right job because we may have made a mistake somewhere along the way and didn't do a good job matching it. But we'll find you a career. So we work really, really hard to hire great people and then get them to the career that makes them successful and impacts us as an organization. So the deep belief here in developing the people that come on board, our existing team, and giving them the development that they need to be successful overall. So as a learning person and a development person, that's like a dream come true. Like I've spent my fair share in financial services, cutting budgets, cutting team members, and just surviving. It's such a breath of fresh air to come into an organization where this is truly important to us. So, um, we have grown the learning and development team by a third, brought in some phenomenal people that have really elevated what learning is here now in the organization. We've built something called the leadership journey. So Doug Campbell on my team, phenomenal. He's my leadership development director. He's built an 8-phase leadership development program, and we did it by listening. What do we need? As an organization, what makes us unique. We often say something called the Wintrust way. Well, what is the Wintrust way? It's a different way of going about your day. And so everything we do is built around those concepts that are there. And then I think if you want to see a visible sign of that commitment to developing our people, it's in the construction of our learning center. So we are building a state-of-the-art learning center here on campus in Rosemont in Chicago. And it's a phenomenal way to say we believe in developing our people, so much so that the brick and mortar where they're going to do it, the experience that we create, the environment that will be there will be super conducive to learning and developing people. So organizations just aren't doing that right now. I last week I was with a bunch of CLOs across the country, and I heard 9 times out of 10, we're cutting, we're cutting, we're cutting. And you know, we're wise about how we do things, obviously, but it's purposeful in why we're doing it to create the experience that we want to develop the people that are going to be the key to our success as an organization going forward. So, as a learning person, if there's a learning person out there listening to this, they will be like, yes, sign me up.
I'm sure it's so rare that you hear that, and I applaud your whole organization, especially the top leaders who see the importance of this. I'm curious, what, based on all your years of experience with executive coaching and the wonderful team that you've now put together, what are some of the key areas of content that are like, we must include this and that? These are essentials for what we want to do to develop people. And also, what levels of people within the organization is this going to be open to?
Yeah, so a lot is brand new over the last 18 months. It took us about 6 months to get into structure when I arrived here 2 years ago. So we went through what we called the learning transformation, and we looked at all the things that we had. So we've got the typical teller training and branch manager training, that type of stuff, and some orientation, onboarding type things in various businesses. But they were very pocketed in those businesses. So we became a center of expertise and said, we're going to support the entire enterprise. And so what does that mean? So we went on the listening tour and said, what are the biggest needs that you have to each
Mhm.
of our 23 business lines? And the number one thing was leadership. Like we need leadership. We need management training. We need to prepare the next level of leaders in our organization to be ready to step into those roles. So that was our primary focus last year, was to get what I talked about earlier, the leadership journey built and put out there. So 8 phases from I think I want to be a manager, called fundamentals, all the way to our executive track of developing our executives in every place in between with all that. And that's open to the organization. So as you work your way through the various destinations, some of them are nomination to get into some of the programs, some are specific to high potential folks that are in the organization, but it's all tied together. So anything we do around developing leaders is tied to this journey. For example, we do an assessment. If we do a Hogan 360, there's a pathway of when you do that now in their development, because we know there's a certain point in that development that assessment feedback is much more beneficial than at another time in their development overall. So we try to do everything we can to push into those spaces. Now, outside of that, it's like, what are some of the fundamental things, right? How do we create the experience? So um, I say learning experience 100 times a day. To me, that's the ultimate thing. What is the learning experience all about? So we wanted to bring a little bit of what the future of learning looks like to the organization. And we started about a year ago. It's something called Taking Flight. So everyone's familiar with DISC training, right? So DIS and C, right? So multiple versions of DISC training are out there.
Mm-hmm.
I came across a version of DISC training at a conference just a couple of months after I got here and met the individual there. It's called Taking Flight. So Taking Flight is all about the disc survey, but tied to birds.
Yes, I'm familiar with
Have you
that.
seen it? Yes, it's
Yeah,
amazing.
Paul
There
and
are birds everywhere in this organization. Eagles, the owls, the parrots, and doves. That's what we're known as. That's what we adjust. And we introduce that, and we can't host those classes enough for the
mm,
demand that's out there, because people want to understand how they can communicate and why people communicate the way they do. And how do I connect with these people? Because there's
mhm,
this real, there's this need when you are here to make that connection.
mm,
Or in a virtual space, how can I connect that way? Understanding, we have backgrounds now that have all the birds on it. So when people come onto a conference call and the birds pop up, you understand, oh yeah, you're an eagle, right? Or you're an owl, whatever the case may be. So we've got stuff like that. We have new hire orientation that we took a step back and said, what are your fondest memories of your first day in an organization? They're not on your laptop doing your compliance training, right? It was that moment where you got introduced to the organization, to its strategy, to some of its leaders,
mm,
to how you find information, all that type of stuff. So we created what we call NHO, new hire orientation, and went back to the basics of welcome someone to the organization on their first day, right? Give them a mug, give them a mouse pad and a pen, and make them feel like they made the right choice.
mm,
And we get phenomenal feedback on that program, that people feel welcome, that we invested that time in them, and it was on their first day, right? When it should be overall.
mhm. I want to acknowledge you for that because, and really for all the things you've mentioned already, just because so often people don't have that kind of welcoming and orientation and they're left to fend for themselves. And that first impression that we always talk about being so important, the new hires are assessing the company and am I going to want to stay here based on what I experienced the very first day.
Yeah,
So I love what you just described. I just think it's such common sense, isn't it, Brian? And
it kind
yet
of is.
how many organizations really are doing it well?
Yeah, it's unfortunate because you experience that, and then you're immediately on your first week in the organization kind of scratch your head saying, did I make the right choice?
Right.
Where I can impact that directly on day one saying I made the right choice.
Hmm.
And it makes the first week just go a little bit smoother for folks
Oh,
that are there.
yes. I
And
would.
that's
dramatically so.
yeah. That's that kind of sums up my philosophy when it comes to this job in itself. I mean, leading training functions is just fun for me. I've done it multiple times. Most of the time, it's a rebuild. It's coming in and kind of building something, or making some changes to the existing learning function or whatever the case may be. But I love it. To me, this is like Legos, right? It's like all that. But
I can
um,
tell,
oh
I
yeah,
can, I love that you enjoy it so much. And I know that that has a ripple effect on your team and then on everyone who participates in your learning program. So I want to acknowledge you for all that you have done and are doing right there at Wintrust. And just as a way of bringing this kind of together, is there anything else that you can think of around leadership that has occurred to you since we started our conversation that you would like to share as we are reaching our closing point?
yeah. Well, the time went way too fast, Meredith. But I wrote down some things here, and if you will just indulge me, I'll just kind of go through a few things.
Yes,
Uh,
I would love that.
and when it comes to that, so um, it, one of the most powerful things that I've learned in the various organizations where I have come in and taken over leadership responsibilities was the impact of that first 90 days. And I am an eagle, otherwise known as a high D, right? I live in the world of bullet points and get to the point. And when I would take on a new opportunity and lead a learning function, I knew exactly what I needed to do, and I would implement. I would go, I would do, because I knew that needed to be fixed, this needs to change, and that needs to happen. And I did that over and over again, and it worked out okay in a lot of cases. But it went with a lot of bumps and bruises along the way because I didn't know the organizations that I took on well enough to make some of the changes that I made.
Mm,
So prior to coming to Wintrust, I hit my head enough times at coming here. I said, you know what? This book has been referred to me over and over again and it's sat on my shelf. And it's called The First 90 Days.
mm,
So Michael Watkins, The First 90 Days. I said, I'm going to follow this to a T. It was painful for an Eagle or a high D for 90 days to look and watch and learn and observe. But I
mm,
tell you, it accelerated where we are today because I did it. I waited, I watched, I learned the organization before I made any changes. And I brought the team in. I brought what I call my first followers into the strategy on building this learning function and taking this on and making these changes. And it went swimmingly. It was amazing how smooth it went,
mm,
all because I resisted that urge to come in. Now, did it end up the way I thought it would? It did, and better, but I brought everybody along with me instead
mm,
of
mm.
dragging them or putting them in a cart and hauling them
Yeah.
to the destination. It was amazing. So, for any of you that take on a new responsibility out there and you think I don't have 90 days, you'll make it up on the second 90 days really quickly into your overall destination. So, that was one thing I wanted to make sure um, that I shared in this conversation.
Oh, that is such a great point, Brian. And, even if somebody is not new to an organization, taking a fresh look for any new project or new idea that they would like to implement, getting that buy-in is just so valuable for all the reasons you just stated so well. You don't have the resistance, you don't have the negativity that can kind of overhang that situation because people do feel like you threw them in the cart or dragged them along
Yeah.
instead of, you know, gathering them to really draw on their input. And, that to me is sort of a common thread of what we've been sharing here, whether we were talking about coaching or other leadership challenges, taking a look at the people around me and just asking what would help create the most positive environment here possible. And
Mm,
so you're taking time to do that in the different ways that you've described in our conversation, to me, reinforces that point
Yeah.
beautifully.
Yeah. And, I'll piggyback off of that because I fundamentally, when someone asks me on my leadership house, because we have some open recs right now, so we're interviewing people, and I can consistently get asked, so what's your leadership style? And I kind of simply say the same thing over again. So I hire great people and I get the heck out of their way, right? That's what great leaders do, If you give people tasks to do, then you end up with completed tasks, right? If you give people problems to solve and get out of their way, you develop great leaders. It's that simple. It's like hire good people, get out of their way, and let them do what you hired them to do
Mm-hmm.
overall. So that's powerful. And then when I think about that, it's like great leaders on my team. My direct reports are the best 5 direct reports I've had in my career. They're just phenomenal. But they each know exactly what they have to do and they do it. My job is to plow snow in front of them because I'm in Chicago and clear their path whenever I can and be there and be supportive for them
Mm-hmm.
overall. So that's just that's the organization I want to work for. So I want to make sure that's the organization they get to work for.
Mm-hmm. That's great. And again, over your own years of development as a leader, you've you've learned that and now know the wisdom of implementing that.
Yeah.
Brian, thank you so much for being with me today. Would you please share how people can connect with you and if they want to learn more about the wonderful learning center that you've put in place and are putting in place there at Wintrust?
Yeah, for sure. Probably the best way, reach out to me on LinkedIn. So you can search Brian S. Wallace on LinkedIn. There, I'm on Facebook as well, out there. That's probably the best way to connect with me overall. I get a notification every time someone pops into LinkedIn and says hi. So happy to chat with people. I've often been accused of being passionate, so that probably comes across in this conversation. So if you want to talk leadership and you got a few hours, then I'm happy to do that. So I'm all about investing in people that are passionate about this topic.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Well, I'm sure you'll have some people reaching out to you, especially other people in the learning and development arena who probably would love to hear more about the wonderful work that you're doing there. So, Brian, thank you again for being with me today. It's been such a joy talking to you.
Thanks, Meredith. I've enjoyed every minute of it. Take care.
Thanks for tuning in to my podcast. Now head over to growstrongleaders.com and check out our 2 books, Connect with Your Team and Peer Coaching Made Simple. While you're there, download the free facilitator guide to find out how to implement our unique peer coaching system. Until next time, I'm Meredith Bell.